I'm Sarah Akrami. I'm an Iranian Canadian author and translator. Before we start the event, I want to congratulate the victory in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice for recognizing that downing of flight PS 752 by the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was intentional and a terrorist act. On behalf of everyone, we extend our congratulations for this victory to Mr. Ali Gorji, who lost his newlywed niece along with her husband, Mr. Shaheen Muqaddam, who lost his wife and son, and Mr. Mersad Zarei, who lost his son on flight PS 752. This victory is for everyone who has somehow been hurt by the Islamic Republic of Iran during the past 43 years. Whether they killed, imprisoned, tortured, or suppressed your family member or yourself, or whether they have deprived you from visiting Iran and your loved ones, and you pass your days with the memories and hope of one day seeing that land again. This is the third session that we are holding about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps with respect to flight PS 752 and why this organization should be designated as a listed terrorist entity under the Criminal Code of Canada. Today, our parliamentarian guest is the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi, member of the Canadian Parliament, Shadow Minister for Transport, and Vice Chair of Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure, and Communities. Those of you who watched last week's Standing Committee on Transport session regarding Flight PS 752 are definitely aware of the Liberal government stance on the issue of IRGC. Without any further ado, we're going to hear from the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi. Ms. Kuzi, why do you think that the Liberals are reluctant to designate the entire IRGC organization as a terrorist entity? And do you have any hope that this government will hold the Islamic Republic of Iran accountable for downing flight PS 752? Time is yours, madam.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for having me here today. And thank you all so much for joining me. I first of all want to extend my most sincere condolences to everyone affected by the downing of PS 752. And I know we've all been affected, certainly in some regard or another, but those of you who have lost family members, as well as close friends in the community, I just extend my sincere condolences. And thank you so much for having me here today. And I echo Sarah's words regarding congratulations for the Ontario court ruling yesterday. I was so very pleased to see it. I did see a little bit of misinformation on social media, not surprisingly. The American support group recognized it, I think, as the Canadian response rather than the provincial Ontario response. But nonetheless, it is significant. It is significant to have this ruling in our favor. So I'll start a little bit with my background. What I say here today probably will not be new for you, and a lot of it will probably be repetition of my former colleagues who I know have spoken to you, both Garnet Jennis, who works very closely with many communities across Canada, as well as MP Michael Chong, who serves as our Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs. So there may be a lot of repetition, but I also think that that should hearten you, because it means that we are one unified voice in our position in terms of what happened, what needs to be called out, and what needs to occur as a result of that terrible incident. And of course, as you know, it's not only the one terrible incident, it's many actions of the government, the Iranian government over a number of years now. But please feel, as I said, heartened that if you hear me repeating what you've heard before, it is just because we are so uniform in our conviction as to, as I said, the necessity of the action that has to be taken. So a little bit about myself before I get too much into it. I'm very fortunate. I was born and raised in my riding here in South Calgary. I went to elementary, high school, university, undergrad here in Calgary, and I did a master's of business. I did a political science degree, a master's of business administration at a university, the University of Rutgers in the United States. After completing my MBA, I was living in New York City at the time, and so I developed an interest in the United Nations. I won't get into too much of a commentary on the UN right now, but to say that I developed an interest in international affairs. And when I was considering what to do next, I genuinely thought it was going to be some type of marketing, or I was very interested in the use of data analytics in politics, which came to be a very big thing in the next 20 years, interestingly enough. But I gained an interest in international relations, and someone said to me, why don't you write the Canadian Foreign Service exam? And so I did, and I ended up coming in number 1 out of 8,000 in the process that year. So some things, some good things are meant to be, and I always as well say, please don't ask me what I got on the entrance school for laws, the LSAT, because I do not perform nearly as well. But from there, I started a 15-year career in the Canadian Foreign Service, which of course piqued my interest in foreign affairs and beyond our borders. And I was very fortunate that I had the opportunity to live and work in Argentina. I then served as consul and chargé d'affaires in El Salvador, and then finally as Canadian consul to Dallas, Texas. So my experience in the Foreign Service was primarily in the Americas. And the Americas, of course, as does everywhere in the world, reflects a completely different geography and history. And so there certainly, while we were dealing with sort of remnants of military juntas, which led for terrible economic situations, such as in Argentina, or compromised security in El Salvador. Certainly when I was there, it was 15 years after the Civil War, and things had seemed to get a little bit back to normal, largely under the wings of the Americans. But all to say, it was a different environment in that, and I would say for 2 reasons. One, although there had been negative forces within the regions, there was relative peace and stability. Certainly you couldn't walk down the street in San Salvador in all neighborhoods, but at all, or travel to some regions, but relative peace and stability in that people felt, I would say they had access to food, they had access to medical facilities, these types of things. And the second one is that there was no interest in any of the places that I served of having any regional influence. And I think that's a major contrast to Iran as well. And if I had to pick a third one, it would be the alliances with other non-democratic nations. You didn't see that as much. A bit with Cuba, of course, a bit with Venezuela, but not. So just to give you a background, as my background, sort of to give you context of what I've been experienced to in the environments that I have seen. What I will say is that I had the very good fortune of serving 1 year as a policy advisor to the then Honorable Peter Kent, who served as Minister of State for the Americas and Foreign Affairs. I took a year leave from the Foreign Service to do this, and it was an incredible opportunity. I had an opportunity to deal firsthand in the coup in Honduras in 2009, work for the then United Nations Security Council bid, although I believe our approach was very different from Trudeau's most recent bid in an effort to do that. But one thing I will say, which made a significant difference to the work that I did then, and what I hope to see a return to, and I promise you this all has relevance to the topic at hand today, and that is that Prime Minister Harper, like him or dislike him, I give him complete credit, and it was not him alone, John Baird, who served as Foreign Affairs Minister. My husband had the good fortune of working for him. Jason Kenney, who was my predecessor, and of course is now the Premier of Alberta. Mr. Kenney held the seat of Calgary-Minneponka, the one I now hold, prior to myself. But the Harper administration had a commitment to values which promoted democratic nations and its citizens, and they walked this. They did not just talk it; they walked this to the. I would say even to a principled position, to the frustration of international interlocutors. I would say even myself, myself sitting at the policy advisor desk in Minister Kent's office when we were evaluating a nation such as Cuba and what our foreign strategy should be. We had a clear policy that was we only talked to those who were vocal against the regime within Cuba. And I was concerned that it was important to have some engagement, because if you do not, then certainly what fills the void are other and democratic nations. So at the time, this certainly was Venezuela, China, and more regional, more negative regional influence as well. So my point is they were so incredibly principled, and I think we see a real lack of that now. So the entire Harper administration was committed to democracy, justice, prosperity. Oh, Brazil, that's the other nation I wanted to mention, which seemed to me to be too young as a nation to be doing many of the things which they were doing, and I believe I was proved right in the end. But democracy, justice, prosperity, which many nations don't like the name of. I can understand that. I think what it really means is the commitment to free market principles. And I think we're even seeing that being sort of debated and not what it once was here in North American society in terms of a few big conglomerates or companies running everything. But generally speaking, let's just put it aside for prosperity market forces. And most importantly here, the rule of law, that no individual is more important no matter than any other individual, regardless of office or position of power, and human rights. They have, but as I said, they had an unwavering commitment to this, and it was unwavering. And as I said, they paid a price for it in terms of their position in the international community. Everything they did was based upon this, from pulling out of accords to direction of aid. Their aid was absolutely based upon the nations which follow democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. I saw this firsthand in the Americas office. And even I, within the Americas office, was given the document called the Americas Strategy, and essentially what it was based upon democracy, justice, and prosperity, and everything flowed from there. Every single decision that we made. And my point is that what has happened to that? What has happened to this in the last 6 years since Trudeau came to power? It has completely gone out the window. And there are two things I see which are incredibly troubling, which leads us to where we are today and to the committee meeting that we had last week. And they are, first of all, the method of diplomacy, which Trudeau has undertaken. And, I recognize we have been in a pandemic the last 15 months. I was reading an article in The Economist this week on how diplomacy has switched to Zoom diplomacy. Some of it will stay this way, some of it will go back. I think a lot of it will go back myself. But just the manner in how they did everything, where really it was selfie diplomacy, social media diplomacy. Major political positions came out in the form of tweets rather than having discussions or positions. I think of all the tours, Trudeau's tour to Africa, and really, in my opinion, I do wonder what it accomplished. At the end of the day, I recognize some things have significance, but as everyone I know on this call can appreciate, there is a difference between having sentiments, making something of significance, and actually taking an action which stands up for principles. And that leads me to the second concern I have about the Trudeau administration, and that is that they have no principles on which they base their foreign policy. It is absolutely evident to me. It is incredibly fair weather. There is no broad principles from which every foreign policy decision is made. It's within silos, without question. It's fair weather. Positions change. We only need look at the response to the pandemic, and I recognize everyone was working with new information and new knowledge, but the foreign policy, there has been no declaration of strong values positions from which they create their foreign policy. I mean, they talk about things like diversity and inclusion and these types of things. Excellent, great, yes, you know, diversity, inclusion, all of these things are absolutely wonderful for us to experience as Canadians. But we cannot experience diversity and inclusion and expression of freedom if we do not have safety and security. Both from a physical sense, but also an economic sense. So, you know, I argue that, and I did see a tweet, I believe, where someone said, you know, what I'm saying to you today is one of the 8 foreign policy papers you only ever see, which is my principled position is better than your principled position. And yes, it is, because it's based on principles. So I would just argue that there has been an incredible shift away from my apology in North American culture, of course, or perhaps it sounds too Christian, you know, Northern Star. No, I believe this is also a nautical term as well. You know, in terms of guiding our policy to make our decision and which we take actions on. And we have absolutely lost this with the Trudeau government. So where does this leave us? Where it leaves us to the committee meeting, which we had last week, which Sarah referred to and which some of you watched. And the result is, you know, we have this report from the Honourable Ralph Goodale, and good luck to him as he begins his new position with the UK High Commission. But a report which seemed, you know, very comprehensive, but again left a lot of uncertainty as to required outcomes, which will never be achieved, such as a conclusion from the Iranian government as to what really happened with PS 752. I said it in the meeting. If the world is waiting for a resolution or an explanation from the Iranian government, this will never happen. And so we therefore can never take any type of action to hold Iran to account, which is just incredibly frustrating. So the result was this report. I'm not going to call it lame. I think it's valuable, but it needed to go further. And then the meeting where you saw it, I was completely shocked. One of the government members actually did a better job of, and in truth, I was trying to leave some material for my colleagues who were going to be questioning after me, but they discussed, oh, excuse me, okay, clearly I made some type of error. I've done this before. The better phrase is Iranian regime, excuse me, rather than Iranian government. Yes, my apologies, definitely regime. Yes, I'm so sorry. Regime, I will use that going forward. I apologize. We just use so much the term in Canadian politics, this government, and frankly, I've come to regard it with disdain and disrespect. So my apologies that I'm for not using the appropriate reference, the regime. Yes, thank you. But you know, we got this meeting where, as I said, a government member outlined better than myself the atrocities of the Iranian regime relative to this incident in terms of the time taken to hand over the black box, in terms of bulldozing human remains, all of these terrible things. And you know, Garneau is he's done this for several years now. You know, he can dance around this stuff, but I was really shocked by the Minister of Transport, who said, you know, this is terrible. We never want this to happen again. And if we do not take any steps unilaterally as a nation or even as a global community, it will absolutely happen again, without question. Without question, it will happen again. You know, a child who steals and doesn't get caught will steal again. Like it's just it will happen again. And so the result was this committee, which left, I think, very little very much to be desired. And this is where I start to sound repetitive. You have heard my colleagues come here before you and demand of the government the same things, which I'm going to mention here again now, which is the recognition of the IRGC, as a terrorist group. We all know that this resolution passed in the House in 2018 in the last Parliament with no action by the Canadian government. Once again, why not? It's incredibly frustrating. And then, of course, the second thing, which I talked about significantly and repetitively in the meeting, was the implementation of the Magnitsky sanctions. And certainly when we've had conversations with groups, the Canadians Against Terrorism, you know, they are demanding stronger action, and so they should. And so they should. Naming names of individuals, we know Erwin Kotler has done this in the past, but why shouldn't we do this? Why can't we do this? And I would say there are two major forces at play. I would say in the international community, I do see an absence of, courage to stand up for what is right, whether it's through the World Economic Forum or the United Nations. It's really hard to read some of Guterres's tweets now and then, but there was just a lack of will to act as a global community against actions such as this. And I can understand it to a certain point where you hope the oppressors will, in acting nice, they will come around, or they will concede a little bit. And again, this is not the case. Just human nature does not work like this. If you give someone an inch, they will take 6 inches. This is the result. So I would say, first of all, there is just a, thank you very much, a lack of will to do anything from a global community. And this is through all of the global forums that I'm seeing right now. And locally or domestically here in Canada, it is an effort to vote by that I believe the government works specifically or caters to groups that will vote, that will provide them more votes, and it results in them not making clear, principled decisions once again. So, in conclusion, I come before you with the same positions as my colleagues, MP Chong and MP Garnett-Janis, and in the context of the Harper government, where we took principled policy positions. And I dearly hope that we will have the opportunity to return to government one day in an effort to implement this type of foreign policy again. And the proof is in the pudding. We did not just say these things as an administration when we were in power. We acted upon them in the international community. And I look forward to a return to that at some point under a conservative government. And I didn't come here to be political, but very frankly, to answer Sarah's initial question, no, I don't think we will see anything change, because the Trudeau government is waiting upon international consensus, and they will never receive it, and they don't have the courage to act unilaterally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi. Our first expert is a young and talented lady. Ms. Sarah Teach is a Canadian attorney, consultant, and author based in Toronto, Canada. She holds a Juris Doctor degree from the University of Toronto, an MA in Counterterrorism and Homeland Security, and undergraduate degrees in Psychology and Sociology from McGill University. She has also studied law at the National University of Singapore, Sarah has held research positions at the Monk School of Global Affairs in Toronto and at the International Institute for Counterterrorism in Israel. She has worked on classified projects for the International Criminal Court in The Hague and led a Canadian National Security Working Group delivering policy submissions to the Parliament of Canada. Her current research focuses on international human rights law and national security law and policy. Sarah's current affiliations include the Canadian Coalition Against Terror and the International Counterterrorism Review. Ms. Teach, why should Canada recognize the IRGC as a listed terrorist entity, especially after the Flight PS-752 tragedy? And how does designation of IRGC will protect our national safety and security? Time is yours, madam.
Thanks, Sarah. And first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me to speak on this esteemed panel. It's an extremely important topic, and it's an honor to be here with you all. I'd like to start by answering your question somewhat in reverse order. So I'll begin by providing some background on the listing process, including the criteria for listing. Then I'll speak on why the IRGC fits this criteria and why they should be listed. And then I'll talk about some of the legal effects when a group is listed as a terrorist entity. And of course, because I only have minutes and this topic could take hours, I could only really provide an overview, but we can get into more detail if anyone has questions in the following question and answer segment. So the terrorism part of the Canadian Criminal Code, and that's part 2.1, includes provisions that permit the Government of Canada to list entities that engage in or participate in terrorist activity as terrorist entities. Any entity, if it participates in terrorist activities, can be listed. So it doesn't have to be a highly organized structure or around for X years or even really active in Canada. And an entity can be any person, group, trust, partnership, fund, unincorporated association, or organization. The entity just has to have knowingly carried out, attempted to carry out, participated in, or facilitated a terrorist activity. And terrorist activity is defined in the code as basically any act or omission that's committed for a political, religious, or ideological purpose, at least in part for the purpose of intimidating the public or a segment of the public, or compelling a person or a government or organization to do or refrain from doing some act. It has to cause death or serious bodily harm, or else it has to at least endanger life or cause serious risk to the health or safety of the public or a segment of the public. So that's a pretty broad definition. And essentially what it boils down to is this is any entity that's engaged in political, religious, or ideologically motivated violence. There are some categories that are considered a sort of de facto terrorist activity. So you don't have to go through the analysis of seeing whether it fits this definition that I've just laid out. And one of those types of acts is acts that interfere with civil aviation. So that's basically and automatically considered to be terrorist activity. So as I suspect is becoming obvious to many of you by now, it's pretty clear that the IRGC fits the bill and fits the definition of a terrorist entity. They are an entity, certainly. And, in that vein, despite Minister Garneau's suggestion to the contrary at last week's committee meeting, there's no requirement that the entity has to be independent from a nation state. And the IRGC has very clearly participated in terrorist activity. This was the case even before the downing of Flight 752, with the organization's longtime supporting of terrorist activities across the Middle East and engagement in ideological violence, and actually even their association with groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, which themselves are already listed as terrorist entities. This should have been enough to ground listing the entire IRGC, because another way to get an organization listed is to simply demonstrate that they are associated with an already listed entity. But now with Flight 752, of course, the case has become even stronger. And as most of you will know, just yesterday, Justice Bella Baba of the Ontario Superior Court released his decision on default judgment, siding with the families of Flight 752 that had sued Iran, the IRGC, and others under the Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act. Justice Bella Baba found on a balance of probabilities, which is the civil standard of proof, that the defendants, being Iran, the IRGC, and the other named individuals, intentionally shot down Flight 752. It's significant here that the civil standard of proof is a balance of probabilities, because although usually the criminal standard is higher, it's typically beyond a reasonable doubt, the standard of proof that's required actually to list an entity as a terrorist entity under the criminal code is only a reasonable grounds to believe. And a reasonable grounds to believe is a lower standard of proof as compared to a balance of probabilities. So this is actually really significant, and this decision becomes like the nail in the coffin for the case of listing the IRGC. because now that it's been found that the defendants, including the IRGC, engaged in intentional terrorist activity on a balance of probabilities, it really becomes quite impossible to argue that there are no reasonable grounds to believe that they participate in terrorist activity, because that's a lower standard than what's already been found. Even actually without yesterday's development, even if there had been no finding yet that the shootdown was intentional, this still probably would have been terrorist activity. It was ideological or politically motivated to leave the airspace open. It certainly caused death, and it was, at the least, committed to dissuade the US from attacking Tehran by effectively using the plane load of passengers as human shields. But certainly yesterday's ruling really strengthened this case. Now, in terms of the legal effects, when an entity is listed as a terrorist entity, it has significant legal effects that overall can really hamstring the group's ability to operate in Canada. The effect may be a little less dramatic here because Iran already doesn't have an embassy, but it's still quite significant. When an entity is listed, banks have to freeze their assets. They have to provide reports regularly to the regulating authority regarding what assets, if any, they're still holding on to. It becomes a crime for a Canadian, either in Canada or anywhere in the world, to participate in or facilitate any activity of the listed group if it's for the purpose of enhancing their ability to carry out terrorist activity. It also becomes a crime for a Canadian anywhere in the world to provide property or services to a terrorist group. And then there are immigration consequences as well. So membership in the listed group can cause a non-Canadian to be denied entry to Canada. We also can't discount the intrinsic value of naming and shaming, of the government of Canada actually coming out and saying that the IRGC is a terrorist entity and that they engage in terrorism. That's not so much legal, of course, but it's still important as a matter of respect and recognition. It's a matter of respect and recognition of those that have been victimized and terrorized by the IRGC to call it what it is, and that's terrorism. All right, I'll leave it there for now. Hopefully I haven't spoken too fast, and I look forward to your questions in the next segment.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sarah Teach from Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Senior Fellow at Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Our next expert is another young and talented Iranian expert. Mr. Alireza Nader is a Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies, focusing on Iran and U.S. policy in the Middle East. He also researches the Islamic Republic's systematic repression of religious freedom and currently serves on ADL's Task Force on Middle East Minorities. Throughout his career, Alireza has advised the U.S. government on Iran. He is regularly called upon to share his analysis with senior policymakers, has testified before Congress, and is often interviewed by the media. Prior to joining FDD, Alireza was a senior researcher at the RAND Corporation, where he authored numerous reports and studies on Iran, the Middle East, and the U.S. strategy. He lectured at the George Washington University and has conducted research and taught analytical courses for U.S. Special Forces and analysts at the Department of Defense. He obtained his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from University of California, Santa Barbara, and his Master of Arts in International Relations from the George Washington University. Mr. Nader, how do you view the former U.S. administration's act of designating IRGC as a listed terrorist entity, and how did that affect the terrorist activities of this organization, especially in the Middle East region? Time is yours, sir.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure speaking to you about this important topic. My condolences to the families. I'm also more hopeful now, given the court's ruling. And I think it's very important for the Canadian government to designate the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps as a terrorist organization, as the US has done, which I believe was very beneficial for US national security. The IRGC is a primary military and security actor in Iran. It protects the Islamic Republic from all threats, internal and external. And it is the best funded military force. It conducts the regime's terrorist activities all over the world, from West Africa to Afghanistan. And it's very much involved in illicit activities, including drug smuggling, money laundering, and it has made Canada a base, which I think is a big threat to Canadian national security and U.S. national security. And as we know, the IRGC is responsible for intentionally shooting down PS 752. And your other expert mentioned a number of reasons as to why it may have done so. But we know this was an intentional act. For whatever reason, the IRGC destroyed that plane. It was an intentional and criminal act. I've been researching the Islamic Republic's influence in Canada since I started with FDD about 1.5 years ago. And before then, I heard very regularly from Iranians, both in Iran and the US and Canada, that the regime had built a sizable base of support in Canada, that it was laundering a lot of money into the Canadian economy, and that there were actually a number of pro-regime Canadians living in Canada. Now, of course, the Canadian Iranian community by and large is very successful and has escaped Iran due to persecution, but the regime does maintain this base of support in Canada. We know that Lebanese Hezbollah has a base of support in Canada as well, and has cased Canadian and US airports in the past. And there has been some law enforcement crackdown in Canada on Hezbollah's activities. Some of them are being investigated, but there's a lot more that can be done by Ottawa to go after the IRGC's base of support in Canada. And we know that the PS 752 victims' families have been threatened from within Canada, threatened with physical harm, to remain silent on the regime's shoot down of the plane. And so this is, I think, a very serious issue that Ottawa has been ignoring. And it is crucial, like the other experts on your panel stated, that the IRGC be designated as a terrorist organization, as it is in the United States, because the designation has allowed the US to really go after sources of funding used for terrorism by the IRGC and Hezbollah and other groups allied to the regime. And it has impacted their ability to fund terrorism globally, to stoke violence in places like Israel and the Palestinian territories by providing missiles to groups like Hamas and providing funding to those groups. And the terrorism sanctions on the regime and the IRGC specifically have been effective in weakening these groups, because it takes a lot of money to finance terrorism worldwide. Now, unfortunately, the Biden administration is now pursuing a re-entry into the nuclear agreement, which will release billions of funds to Iran. But Canada, I think, can play a very important role in helping the victims' families achieve justice on the shoot down of PS 752. And I think that really the important step is to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization. There is abundant reason to do so. It's by now very well documented, including by FDD, but also many other organizations. And there's really no reason as to why the Trudeau government hasn't done so. I can't really, just looking at it myself and analyzing myself, I can't come up with a reason as to why the Trudeau government has not designated the IRGC as a terrorist organization. I believe, it might be that the Liberals in Canada hope for the reestablishment of diplomatic relations with the regime, or they want to reestablish business ties even, especially if the US goes back into the nuclear agreement. But I think, those are not very realistic possibilities. I don't think Canada can go back to any sort of quote unquote normal relationship with the Islamic Republic, given everything that's happened, given the killing of so many Canadian Iranians, the intentional killing of so many Canadian Iranians. So I can't really figure out as to why the Trudeau government hasn't designated the IRGC. It's faced pressure by Canadian Iranians and the victims' families, and it's an act that would really benefit Canadian national security, especially as Canada has become a base of money laundering and terrorism finance. I'll stop at that. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alireza Nader, Senior Fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Today, we have the honor of having a family member of Flight PS-752 victim, Miss Azamat Ajdari, who lost her sister, Ganimat, on Flight PS-752, is here today with us. Azamat, could you please tell us, how did you feel when you found out that Flight PS-752 was shut down by IRGC missiles? And what are your expectations from the Canadian government? Time is yours, madam.
Thank you for inviting me. Today, I'm not here as an expert or as a speaker. I'm here as a person whose life has changed after 8 January 2020, when I was woke up at 4 a.m. and with that horrible news. It's 499 days passing from this tragedy, but still I can't believe what happened to us. And when I want to talk about it, I get emotional. It's not easy for me to talk about it. Just 176 passengers weren't the only victims of this tragedy. We as family, we are all victims. We can't be the same people anymore. I can't be the same person. When they said that it was a technical problem, it seems an accident to us. But after 3 days lying, when they came to the media and said it was IRGC that shut down the plane, it was like the plane crashed in our homes again. It was unbelievable. How can a government can shoot the innocent passengers in their own country? How it can be? The military of every country must bring peace and safety to their people, but instead they shut our lives. They changed our lives. Before 11 January that they said it was a human error, it was what they said. To us, it was an accident, but after that, it turned to a crime. They weren't beside us anymore. They were our enemies. It's not fair because our enemy has lots of facilities, but we are fighting with empty hands. We have nothing. We are just seeking justice with empty hands. Yesterday, it was a good news that the Court of Ontario announced that shooting down of PS-752 was intentionally and Terrorism Act, but it's not enough. We strongly want to ask Canada government to put IRGC in the list of terrorists because they do a lot of terrorist acts, and the shooting down of PS752, it's not the only one. But I don't know why the whole world are closing their eyes to these acts. It's not easy to find out that even the rules and the international laws, even in ICAO, are not flawless enough to help us in this route. We have a difficult route. It's really difficult. But we won't give up. We continue until we can get the justice. We never forget, we never forgive. And the only thing maybe we can do, not the only, one of the things we can do is to appreciate everyone like you who stand with us in this difficult journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Azamat Ajdari, who lost her sister Ganimat on flight PS752. Our final speaker is Mr. Kurosh Farhadpour, member of Modern Iran Organization. Kurosh, could you please tell us about your perspective of IRGC and why the designation of IRGC? Why should designation of this organization shall be significant to Canadian government? Is Kurosh available?
Excuse me, Sarah. I think Kurosh is absent today.
Okay, no problems. We are going to, since we have a...
to have a talk. So,
if you would like, Mr. Gorgi, you can speak on behalf of him for a few minutes.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming, and I really appreciate from the families, victims' families, and also Nowin organization. I lost my niece and her husband in this tragedy. They were brilliant, sweetheart, young students in Alberta, University of Alberta, in intelligence. Intelligence technology, I think. Anyways, and so unfortunately we lost them from beginning. Where we were very angry, we were very upset, but we started a lawsuit against the Islamic regime because we knew from the beginning that was an intentional act, because we knew Islamic regime. We knew at what extent they are brutal, criminal, because since 42 years they have done every sort of crimes and terrorism and violation of human rights. So we launched a lawsuit in, well, I initiated personally, and finally yesterday we got a court decision in favor of that, and recognizing that this was an act of terrorism, intentional act of terrorism. So that's a good news, but that's just a small step toward our path to seeking justice. But what we are really disappointed is the government of Canada. For example, where our claim in Ontario Court of Justice, because it's based on the amendment on the State Immunity Act of Canada that allows the victims or victims' family of the terrorism acts by Syria and Iran can sue these two governments. So the government of Canada should serve this claim to the Iranian regime. It takes normally 2 weeks, but it took 8 months. And after 8 months, and with our pressure and all the efforts we did and our lawyers did, they finally just served the claim. And the government of Canada, they weren't collaborative, helpful, and we never understood why they deal so softly with the regime of Iran. At the 1 week after the tragedy, we have a personal meeting with Mr. Trudeau, and Mr. Trudeau told us, well, that was a mistake by Iranian regime. So, Mr. Prime Minister, how you know before an investigation, you know that is a mistake? And they claim consistently that that was a mistake. In the Money conference, he said again, that was a mistake, so what we should do to make it better, etc. And that's coherent. They are in dealing with the regime the passive way, and ineffective. And that raises a serious questions about that. What's going on? Because we don't have any logic explanation, because they compromise the security of Canadians, first of all. Well, as an example, before taking off the plane, PS 752 in the airport, the regime authorities, they come to the plane and ask if any passenger has American passport or not, because they are afraid if there is any American passenger between the passenger in the flight, because they are afraid of the consequences from the United States. But after killings of 176 persons, and most of them Canadian, we see no reaction from the government of Canada, who is responsible for the security of its own people. So what type of message that's sent to the Iranian regime? Well, they encourage them that the next time in other situations, they don't care about, they don't mind. Well, there is no consequence. We do whatever, and they by nature they are criminal. Iranian regime, by nature and by ideology. Okay, so they don't hesitate to do that with the Canadians, and that's in the level of the security, national security.
Thank you.
Again, we knew, and it's very well known, at least among Iranian community in Canada, that there are huge money launderings come from the Iranian regime and IRGC. Actually, IRGC, the Iranian regime is under control of IRGC. That's the reality. Okay, huge amount of money laundering in Canada. They invest in different areas in Canada, economic, construction, real estate, and they finance the lobbyists in Canada. And the question it raises, really, maybe there is some connection between the behavior of the government. That is explained. The government of Canada is so soft, ineffective with the Iranian regime. Maybe there is some under influence of this money that comes from Iran. I think it's a serious issue, serious concern, and really strongly suggest the intelligence community of Canada to go through that, because, for example, we have a Canadian-Iranian MP, Mr. Johari in Toronto. He is clearly very well known is a supporter, as an agent of the regime of Iran. And well, you know, when there is a dirty money, it can influence, affect everything, the economy, the politics, and so I think, because there is no explanation, there is a resistance from the government of Canada for a motion who already passed in the parliament, just to enlist the IRGC as a terrorist organization. Already the foreign branch is already enlisted as a terrorist organization, and with all crimes the IRGC they did, they simply they resist to all evidence and all pressure to put them in the. So I think that's much more than naivety of the government, much more than incompetency of the government. I think there is some tie in regarding of the money between Iranian regime of some of key politicians of Canada.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ali Gorji, who lost his niece on flight PS 752. Due to lack of time, we're going to move on for 10 more minutes and ask some questions. We are starting with the questions that were already sent to me. The first question is for the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi. Why didn't the conservative government designate the entire IRGC organization as a listed terrorist entity in 2012 and only designated its external branch, the Al-Quds Force?
I don't know. I wasn't there at the time. So I'm sorry, Sarah. I don't know why that didn't happen. Yeah, I'll leave it there. It's a good question. And if you could send it to me, I will look into it, but I can't tell you now.
No problem. Thank you. So the next question is for Ms. Sarah Teach. The families of Flight PS 752 victims wish this case be taken to International Criminal Court. What is the process for a case of crimes against humanity to be examined and investigated at the International Criminal Court?
So the problem is that Iran is not a state party to the Rome Statute, and Ukraine isn't either. So one of them really needs to be for the court to be able to take jurisdiction, unless the UN Security Council refers the situation, which geopolitically seems a little bit unlikely. So with the current state of who's a state party, I don't think it's possible, but that's not to say that it couldn't be possible in the future. Ukraine could always file a declaration under Article 12 of the Rome Statute, giving it jurisdiction to look into a particular case, even if they don't want to join the court overall. So that would be my prognosis as the most likely way to get it to the court.
Thank you so much. The next question is for Mr. Alireza Nader. Do you think that the revival of JCPOA will affect the Islamic Republic of Iran's sponsorship of terrorism, and what will some of its consequences be for the Biden administration?
Yes, definitely. If the U.S. goes back into the JCPOA with a nuclear agreement, that will free up billions of dollars that the regime can use to fund whatever really it wants. And I think naturally part of it will go toward expeditions on Hamas and the Syrian regime and Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen. So I think that's one of the biggest flaws of US policy, is that it's just, when it comes to Iran and the Middle East, too focused on just the nuclear agreement and not a lot of other issues. With Canada, I'm not sure what Canada's policy is really focused on. I don't think it really has a focus when it comes to Iran. And as Mr. Gorji described, I think it's very soft. It's almost non-existent, I would argue. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is again for Ms. Sarah Teach. As an expert and human rights lawyer, when you heard that the Islamic Republic of Iran has shut down a passenger aircraft, what went through your mind?
I actually immediately went over to one of my clients' houses with a legal notepad and a pen, and I started drawing out the different provisions of the JVTA that I thought could come into play. So we just had a big brainstorming session. I thought right away that it could be characterized as a terrorist activity. Even, as I said, even if it wasn't intentional, it really does fit this, fairly broad definition of terrorist activity. So that's the first thing that went through my head.
Thank you so much. The next question is again for Mr. Alireza Nader. What are your thoughts about withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq and Afghanistan? And will that increase the presence and infiltration of the Islamic Republic of Iran in both countries?
Well, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I think the biggest risk is the Taliban coming back to power in much of Afghanistan, if not all of it. And the regime in Iran has good relations with the Taliban. So that's just something to keep in mind. And U.S. troops, there are still a few thousand U.S. troops in Iraq, but Iraq remains very firmly under the control of the Islamic Republic. And again, I think if countries like the US and Canada pursue a soft policy toward Iran, the regime in Iran, then it will help the regime in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, because the agreement will help the regime economically.
Mr. Nader, there is another question for you. Do you have concerns that lobbying groups such as NIAC and IPD would brainwash and cloud the judgment of the public and Trudeau government? How could their actions be countered?
So a number of my friends and colleagues and many activists I know in Canada are concerned that the Islamic Republic has built a very strong influence and lobby network in Canada and the United States as well. And there's quite a bit of evidence to suggest that's the case. We know that the Foreign Minister Javad Zarif understands American and European and Canadian politics pretty well, relatively. And so I think the regime has recognized that it does need a lobby and influence network in key Western countries, and has spent a lot of time building it up, and you see its influence, especially on the nuclear issue. You see some of these voices become louder. But with the Islamic Republic, I think that it definitely has a network in Canada, and I think it's pretty extensive. Sometimes I think even more so than the regime has a network in Europe. I think it might have even deeper roots in places like Canada.
Thank you. The next question is for Ms. Sarah Teach again. Can the ruling issued yesterday be challenged in the Supreme Court of Canada, and can it be a basis for legal launch in ICC by the families?
My internet connection appears to be unstable, so hopefully this stays. So what Iran has actually done in the past is they have, like they've done here, not fought the case, but then after it's already been lost for them, come in and try to have the judgment set aside. So we may see that happen again. And in terms of the ICC, using it for the ICC, I believe that was the second part of your question, because my internet crapped out just about then. That's more of an independent inquiry. If the case does go before the ICC, perhaps the Office of the Prosecutor can use this judgment to bolster her case, but they're independent processes, and that the ICC isn't an appeal court from the Canadian Supreme Court of Canada.
Thank you so much. The final question is for the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi. If the Conservatives win the upcoming federal election, what will their stance be regarding IRGC and also the Islamic Republic of Embassy in Canada?
We put forward the motion in 2018 to place IRGC on the terrorists, define them as a terrorist. If that didn't, I can't fathom that wouldn't happen. If it did, I would be extremely disappointed. I can't fathom that wouldn't happen. I really struggle to think that wouldn't happen. So that's the response to the first question. And I'm sorry, the second question, Sarah, was?
Will the Islamic Republic of Iran's embassy remain closed?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I think it's too early to say that. And I think, I don't know. I think there would have to be a lot of evaluation as to any benefit. I'm thinking yes. That's where I'm thinking yes, because as I said, the historic conservative position is to not recognize illegitimate regimes and governments. So I would think yes if I had to, but I can't say for certain.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank the Office of the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi for making this happen. I wanted to thank the Honorable Stephanie Kuzi herself for being here today, Ms. Sarah Teach from McDonald-Laurier Institute, and Mr. Ali Reza Nader from Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Also, Azamat Ajdari, who lost her sister on flight PS 752, who joined us from UK. Thank you so much, everyone, and we look forward to see you in another panel. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.